Okay, my name is Brandy Smith. I'm the Communications Director at Utah Clean Energy. And from all of us at Utah Clean Energy, thank you for joining us for our second virtual Lunch and Learn of 2025. Um, the topic of today's webinar is a little bit of a mixed bag. We're going to talk to you about some really exciting opportunities and local projects that we're excited to tell you about. But we're also dealing with some very real threats to those opportunities. The US Senate is deliberating H.R. 1. It's a massive and controversial budget proposal that passed the House of Representatives by a single vote on May 22nd. Among its many provisions, the proposal rolls back a wide range of clean energy tax credits. These are credits that are benefiting Utahns today, and they are vital to fueling Utah's transition to a cleaner, more resilient future. So, with so much at stake, we asked our own Max Becker, the Senior Associate for Advancing Federal Climate Opportunities. I love a title that tells you exactly what the person does. Max has been leading Utah Clean Energy's efforts to help secure and also to help implement millions of dollars in funding from the IRA for institutions and governments across the state. We asked him to give you just a snapshot of some of the benefits the IRA is already bringing to Utah businesses, to Utah communities and families, and more importantly, talk about what is currently in the queue and what we could stand to lose if we don't take action to protect these vital tax credits. So before I hand things over to Max, a couple of reminders. Please put lots of questions and comments in the chat. We will save plenty of time at the end of today's call for Max and our other experts to get to your questions. And so with that, we're going to have Max just dive right in. I think this is about a 30-minute talk, and then we'll have, again, plenty of time for questions. So with that, I'm going to hand things over to Max Becker.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Brandy. I appreciate it. I've been fortunate enough to be at Utah Clean Energy for almost 2 years now, and it's an amazing team with lots of great support. I couldn't ask to work at a better place. And the first year of my job, we're really going to go through all of the funding that our state partners, local businesses, individuals were able to take advantage of from the prior administration. And then we'll talk a little bit about some defense, as Brandy outlined in the intro. But I did just want to start with Utah Clean Energy and what we do here. So we're a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization and have been working in this space for almost 25 years now. You can see our founder and CEO, Sarah Wright, cutting the ribbon with some local leaders for our Climate Innovation Center, which is a living laboratory for energy efficiency in the built environment, which we're so proud of. So if you'd like to take a tour at any time, please reach out to us, and we'll be starting our open houses, I believe, next month. So make sure that you're on the email list for all those. We'd love showing off the building. And we work in four main spaces. We work in the built environment, which is a massive portion of our emissions. So that's embodied carbon, as well as on-site emissions in our built environment. We also work in electrified transport, specifically medium and heavy duty vehicles. And our sort of bread and butter from day one has been modernizing our electric systems, decarbonizing the grid. And then we work also in climate leadership. So sort of enrolling folks in the idea that it's really important for us to have clean air, to have a modern, reliable grid, that we're moving towards an efficient and reliable future. So I did want to start today, before we dive into the specifics of the programs that we've gotten the chance to work on, that we're really proud of pushing forward in the state, if you want to learn more about any of the specific programming or any of the funding opportunities that have been available, there are two really great resources that I want to point you towards. The first one being grist.com. They have a map, and so you're seeing that $7.3 billion amount. So that's all of the investment that's been made in Utah between the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, the BIL, the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and the CHIPS and Science Act. That is a really big number because we received $4 billion for the CHIPS and Science Act for semiconductor manufacturing. And we won't touch as much on CHIPS and Science today. We are going to be talking about the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. And if you want to get an itemized list of any of these grant awards that we'll be discussing, the climate program portal run by Atlas Public Policy, I have to give a huge shout out to them. They've been an invaluable resource and a great partner in spreading the news on everything that we're working on for federal grants. So those are really big numbers. You're seeing 1.2 billion on the screen from Climate Program Portal. And so what does that look like on the ground? We wanted to take a chance and give some real world examples of how this looks in Utah. The first one being a solar array at Central Valley Machine Inc. in Logan, Utah. So this is a precision machine shop that creates parts for aerospace, medical supplies, theme parks, industrial equipment. And so they received a Rural Energy for America program through the United States Department of Agriculture. They received $700,000 for a solar array on top of their facility. That saves them $60,000 a year in the models. So, a massive amount of money that they can put back towards investing in the products that they make. So we're really lucky to have that here in Utah. We're also seeing huge investments in our transmission lines. So, a big part of modernizing our grid is not only bringing on renewable sources of energy, but is also making sure that we have the infrastructure available to move that energy throughout the state. So we have infrastructure projects happening all over the place. We specifically wanted to shout out Mona, Utah, and our partners down there. Next up, we have PanelClaw. So PanelClaw makes solar racking solutions, and they use labor and materials here in the United States. They produce all of their goods in, whether they're in Europe or in the United States, in the place where they will be installed. And so they started a facility in Clearfield, Utah, and they're taking advantage of some of the tax credits that we'll be discussing later on in the presentation. We're really lucky to have them here. And sort of the final thing of again, what this looks like on the ground. We wanted to point out some electric school bus funding that Tintic School District received. So they received a little less than $800,000 for 2 electric school buses. We've also seen the electric school bus program send funding to Salt Lake School District and I believe Davis School District. And so with that, we're seeing, again, that's a huge decrease in air pollution. It's much better for the kids who can be, quite prone to asthma. And I know that all of us are concerned about our air quality here in the state. And this is a really nice transition into, the larger federal grants that we've been working on, as there's a lot of opportunity specifically for transportation that we'll touch on later.
Max, before you move on, I just want to reiterate what you said earlier, which is these examples, these are just the tiniest snapshot of projects in Utah going to Utahns for Utahns. So I just wanted to reiterate that those are just a few examples of many.
Yeah, thanks, Brandy. We get back into the big numbers on this slide, seeing $400 million for clean energy projects for transportation and energy efficiency programs. And I think that number sometimes it's a little bit big in our heads. It's hard to sort of wrap around what that really looks like. And those are the projects that we get to see on the ground. And it's better air quality for our kids, for our seniors. It's resilience and saving money for small businesses throughout the state that are able to invest back into their workers and create better working conditions and lives for communities across the state. So, we just wanted to give a little bit of flavor of what that looks like before diving into sort of the big numbers here. Um, and we wanted to talk a little bit about some of the larger grants that we at Utah Clean Energy are a part of, and then also we're working to support our state partners, make sure that the project that they're working on are as efficient and electric ready and sustainable as possible. Um, so you might have heard that this funding was sort of under attack, which, we are concerned about making sure that this funding, finds its way through. But these funds are obligated to Utah, meaning that the state agencies that are taking care of these six particular programs have contracts with either the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, or the Department of Energy. And so we don't see these funds going anywhere. We know that our partners at the Department of Environmental Quality and our partners at the Office of Energy Development are working really hard to make sure that they're following their work timelines, that they're making sure that these programs are running equitably. That word isn't always welcome these days, but we're very fortunate that we have some great civil servants working at these state agencies, and they're going to make sure that this funding gets rolled out as best as possible. So diving into a little bit about what these programs are, first up is Solar for All. We could not be more excited about this program, and my colleague Jennifer Eden is off on vacation, very well deserved right now. She's helping the state lead this through her technical expertise and support. But this grant is housed at the Office of Energy Development, and it's through the EPA. And this would be rooftop and multifamily solar, or sorry, rooftop solar and community solar across the state for low-income folks. So we would need to see at least a 20% cost savings for the modeled project. So it makes sure that folks that are receiving the benefit of this are not having to take on the cost of building these arrays. And not only that, are we providing reduced energy costs for low income folks. We're also helping to make sure that workforce is developed in different parts of the state so that they can maintain and continue to build on these projects. And we're working on an energy liaison program through this, which would help communities, whether that's a municipal utility, a low-income apartment complex, whoever, navigate the tricky landscape that comes sometimes with federal funding, and making sure that they're pulling all the levers they can for energy efficiency and affordability. So we're really excited about that program. Next up would be the home energy rebates. This is also housed in our Office of Energy Development. This is $101 million for rebates that focus on efficiency in the home, and then rebates for electric appliances that are point of sale rebates. So the home efficiency rebates, which is the first of the two, it's up to $8,000 per home. That's income qualified as well. And for most states, we're still working on setting this up with OED. If there's a 20% reduction in energy cost for the home, they'll receive up to $4,000 for the rebate. And if there's a 35% or more energy cost savings for the home, it'll be $8,000 for low-income individuals. And again, that's sort of stepped as we go by income qualification. And the home electric and appliance rebate is a point of sale rebate. So that can be either at a store or through a contractor, making sure that, Energy Star appliances are going into homes and are saving folks money. So that's up to $14,000, again, income qualified.
And I'll just, another little editorial addition there, Max, on these. We get a call on these rebates every week. Homeowners are keen for support to help them reduce energy waste and lower their costs. So there's a lot of interest in these programs by homeowners.
Absolutely. And we want to make sure that our state elected officials, our congressional delegation, the governor's office know how strongly we feel about these programs and how much money and energy they can save. And we do have some numbers on the impact of this program for Utah. So we're talking about $360 a year per home, which is a massive reduction by percentage of energy costs, given that we do have lower energy costs here in the state. But over $4 million a year for all homes moving forward. And if we're looking at tonnage of CO2 and what that does for our air quality, 47 million tons of CO2 a year that is not going to be emitted into our atmosphere, warming our planet and reducing air quality in Utah. That's huge. Those numbers are huge. So we really want to see this program get off the ground soon and in an equitable way. The next bucket of funding that I wanted to address, this one is run by the Division of Air Quality within the Department of Environmental Quality. And so, like I was saying, with the Tintic School Award, this is both the Clean Heavy Duty Vehicles and the Clean School Bus Award, about $102 million combined for 171 Class 6 and 7 electrified vehicles, so not semi-trucks, sort of just below that, and 88 school buses across the state, 32 ADA compliant, so Disability Act compliant electric school buses. And that also comes with charging infrastructure and workforce development. So we're really thinking through, again, how to sustainably stand up these programs for the long term. So this also, not only are we doing charging infrastructure, but also looking at fleet evaluation for businesses, for government agencies, for school districts, to make sure that we're doing this in an efficient way, that we're really extending these dollars as best as we can. And again, our partners at the state have been really thoughtful about this whole process, and we're really excited to see where they go with these programs. The last bucket of money of this sort of 400 million I wanted to outline is the Clean Ports program. We want to make sure that whatever happens with the port, that it is electrified, that it is sustainable, that it is thinking through how to be the best neighbor possible to our West Side friends. And so this award is $112 million for electrified freight. Around $2 million of that is for planning for climate and air quality solutions, and a big focus on community input. And $110 million of that is for zero emission technology deployment. So again, we're really excited to see where that goes and making sure that the infrastructure that's being placed in an area of Salt Lake that already sees poor air quality, that we're doing this sustainably and effectively if this project is going to move forward. So I'm really excited to talk about the Beehive's emission reduction plan because this is something that I personally get to work on. We at Utah Clean Energy are part of the consultant team for this grant. And we in Utah are one of 10 states, 25 awards total, to receive funding for the implementation of the Beehive emissions reduction plan. So this is $75 million for emissions reduction strategies through 2030. And that includes EV incentives for low-income individuals, zero-emission fleet incentives, everything from light-duty vehicles to refuse haulers, transit buses, school buses, charging and refueling incentives, and zero-emission non-road incentives. Money for mode shifting, so making sure that where we can, we're setting up areas for folks to walk, for folks to ride their bikes, for public transit to be accessible. There's also money for facility energy efficiency efforts, for solar incentives for homes and businesses, oil, gas, and methane emissions reductions, as well as outreach, education, and workforce training. So really thinking through those areas where there's sort of the lowest hanging fruit for emissions reductions, for our air quality. And we're really excited again about where this program is going. Part of this funding went to that initial stage of priority planning, and then there was an implementation competitive grant process, which again, we were one of those 25 awardees. With that funding, the initial planning funding, so we needed to do that 2030 plan, but we also get the opportunity to look towards the future and create a comprehensive climate action plan through the Beehive emissions reduction plan. I know there's a lot of different names in there. So right now we are working on a climate action plan out to 2050. And we get to work on this with all of you. So uh, we get the chance to provide some technical expertise to the Division of Air Quality, but we're also helping lead the stakeholder engagement. So making sure that we're talking to industry folks, to folks in energy generation, to folks in the built environment, to agriculture and working lands, in transportation, and thinking through how we want to set emissions reductions goals for the future. And that we're planning out a sustainable future and a roadmap for Utah. So again, it's really exciting to get to work on those grants and to be surrounded by such a great team, and again to work with the Division of Air Quality on these grants. So I do want to take a chance now. So that's what's been awarded, and I want to take a chance now to talk about what's to come federally for us here in Utah and for the country. So the money that we have received here in Utah was part of roughly $370 billion in grant funding that came through the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. That's specifically for climate and energy. The number is larger in spending if we include all the provisions within the IRA and the BIL, but we're just focusing on those for today. The other side of the investments and the incentives that the Inflation Reduction Act was trying to create comes in the form of tax credits. And we've had tax credits for clean energy in the United States for about the past 15 years. But the Inflation Reduction Act really boosted those tax credits and made them available to significantly more people throughout the country. Right now, those are under threat. And as Brandy alluded to at the beginning of our discussion today, there is a House resolution that was passed called the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. I know I'm not a huge fan of the name either, but it will eliminate many of those energy efficiency tax credits that were provided by the Inflation Reduction Act and that have been pushing the energy efficiency and clean energy revolution that's been happening in the United States forward. And we want to make sure that you all have an understanding of what these tax credits look like and what they're trying to take away from us in the United States moving forward. And these tax credits sort of came into 5 buckets for clean energy. So clean energy and energy storage, energy efficiency in buildings, zero emissions vehicles, charging infrastructure, and then hydrogen and advanced manufacturing, which we're going to talk about a little bit less today. And so those first 3, the clean energy and energy storage, the tax credits look like either you were going to receive a significant amount of money for the production of clean energy on site. So most of the time, this is called the production tax credit, and it would be used at sort of a utility scale size. And so it wasn't as applicable to some folks on the call who might be thinking, how can I make sure that I'm taking advantage of these tax credits? And so the other side of that coin, of the production tax credit coin, is the investment tax credit. And for clean energy and energy storage solutions, you can receive 30% of the cost of the project through this tax credit. With bonus adders that were included in the Inflation Reduction Act, that could be up to 70% of the project. So we're talking about a massive savings to be able to make sure that we're getting solar onto buildings, that there's batteries, that again, there's sort of a resiliency mindset around our infrastructure and our built environment. And moving to our built environment, the energy efficiency in buildings, those tax credits were for larger commercial buildings, but also for residential buildings, specifically the 25C tax credit, which was been really helpful to a lot of contractors that we talked to in the state, a lot of labor union folks. We really want to make sure that people still have access to that. I believe it's $2,500 a year for energy efficiency upgrades in the homes. And then I'm sure that all of you know of the $7,500 that you can take advantage of for zero emission vehicles. For new zero emissions vehicles, there's also the used vehicles tax credit, which is half that, so $3,750. And then there were also tax credits for charging infrastructure. So with all of those tax credits in mind and all of the benefit that it's provided, and we don't have exact numbers on what the tax credits have provided here in Utah or in the United States. But what I can say is that they are an uncapped source of clean energy investment. And I say investment because I think a lot of people get the wrong idea about, hearing that these are uncapped tax credits. The Congressional Budget Office has done a bunch of calculations for the Inflation Reduction Act before it was placed into law. And these tax credits actually make the government money over the long term. They make the individuals and the organizations that are taking advantage of the tax credits money over the long run. It is crucial to our infrastructure needs in the United States to maintain at least some of these tax credits. We know that some are going to go. It's just the way of this current administration. But we really need to be talking about how this is going to affect Utah and the nation more largely. So what this bill will do is it's going to essentially terminate the ITC and the PTC. Those have been the largest drivers of the clean energy transition in the United States, bar none. There would not be a solar industry as we know it today in the United States without the investment tax credit and the production tax credit. I cannot emphasize that enough. Through traditional tax equity financing, which was the mechanism that allowed folks to use the ITC and the PTC before the Inflation Reduction Act, really. In the second half of last year, there were $5 billion worth of investments for $12 billion worth of projects, bringing online over 5 gigawatts of energy for the country through solar and wind. That's massive. In Utah alone, we use, I think at our peak demand, it's 3.9 gigawatts. So we're talking more than the state of Utah being invested in just 6 months at the end of last year. So, losing those would be horrible. And the proposed changes to these tax credits would make any new project basically ineligible for the savings. Construction of a new project to get the ITC or the PTC has to start within 60 days after the bill is passed. So if this bill were to pass, that most likely would mean you'd have to start the project before the end of October. And the project must be placed into service by the end of 2028. And they did create a carve out for nuclear. I want to be clear about that. But the carve out is that construction needs to start by 2028 and it has to be placed in service by 2031. For on-site nuclear generation, I can tell you right now, that is not a possible timeline. We just will not see any nuclear, especially from modular reactors, which is sort of what folks point to as the future of what this technology could look like. We're far out on the technology side. We're far out on the regulation side. We're just not going to see deployment that fast. And so it's a nod to basically nothing. There is also, nuclear and hydrogen power production tax credits specifically. And that's for the production of that energy. And that will end in 2031. Initially, that was going to be 2028, but they did extend it out to 2031. Under the Inflation Reduction Act, that was going to be, it was going to end in full in 2032 with a phase out to 2035. So that's also a reduction in those nuclear and hydrogen power production credits. But nuclear and hydrogen are a fairly small part of our energy mix at this point, and we're seeing rapid growth in wind, solar, and geothermal that we want to maintain moving forward. Another big issue that I wanted to point out from this bill is the foreign entities of concern provisions. And I know that sounds really wonky, but basically these were put into the initial Inflation Reduction Act to make sure foreign entities wouldn't be taking advantage of these tax credits. And the threshold for that was fairly high, but it was basically if there was ownership of the project of over 50%, was by a foreign entity that was deemed hostile to the United States, they would not be able to receive the tax credit. The changes to this provision are so that any of the materials that are used within the project would make it so that the project would not be eligible for the tax credit. So if over 50% of the materials are coming from, let's say, China or Iran or North Korea, Russia, it would not be eligible for the tax credits. And that's a huge problem, particularly with China. They manufacture a lot of solar. It's just a really, really bad provision of this bill. I also wanted to talk a little bit about transferability and lease to own models. So I talked a little bit about tax equity financing, and that's for really, really large projects, utility scale projects. There have been other financing models, some introduced through the Inflation Reduction Act, that made it easier for folks to gain financing for their projects, particularly smaller businesses and government entities and non-taxable entities that were able to take advantage of the tax credits through elective pay. And those are going to be severely restricted. The transferability market that was hosted by the IRS will be taken offline, and lease-to-own models will be, again, severely restricted, making it very difficult for, let's say, a church to be able to put a solar array and battery storage onto their facilities. It would be very, very difficult for them to come up with the financing for that. And the last thing that I wanted to touch on, and this is maybe the hardest to hear for a lot of the folks that are on the call today, there would be a complete repeal by the end of this year of residential solar, of energy efficiency, and of the electric vehicles and the electric vehicle charging tax credits. That would be a huge blow to, again, what has been just massive uptake over the last couple of years. We hear from partners all over the place how important these tax credits are, and we want to make sure that our legislators know just how important this is. And before we get to that action alert and talking about how you can reach out to your elected officials and let them know that we need these investments here in Utah and in the United States, you may have heard about the One Big Beautiful Bill Act clawing back unobligated funds. So through the Inflation Reduction Act, Congress set out these programs and then gave the authority to implement to the executive agencies like the USDA, the Department of Energy, the EPA, Treasury, the list goes on and on. So any of the funding that is housed within those agencies and has not been obligated, and I want to make this clear, the funding that we talked about at the beginning of this talk, so the Beehive Emissions Reduction Plan, all of the clean transportation funding, solar for all, home energy rebates, all of that funding is obligated. The state has contracts for that money, but anything for the future that the Inflation Reduction Act was going to provide will be clawed back and brought back to Congress. And so this includes money for the Department of Energy Loan Program Office, which is one government program that actually makes the government money by providing funding to manufacturing, energy efficiency, clean energy projects throughout the country. It's going to take away funding from the planning and implementation of upgrades to our transmission corridors. So if we're talking about energy dominance, something that really doesn't make a whole lot of sense, funding for air pollution monitoring, and for capital for energy and energy efficiency projects that folks need, especially smaller businesses, to be able to get their projects off the ground. So we want to make sure that you have all the information that you need to call our senators as they're debating the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, and let them know how important these local investments are. These are thousands of Utahns who use these tax credits, who are going to benefit from these grant programs. We're talking about hundreds and hundreds of jobs and job training. Our partners in labor are so excited about a lot of this funding. Our energy demand is only going up, and we need to be thinking through how to do that thoughtfully, how to deploy new resources thoughtfully, how to get transmission moving in the right direction. So please make sure that you're reaching out to Mike Lee and to John Curtis as they're going through what will be roughly a 4 to 6 week process of reviewing the House bill and marking that up and returning it back to the House. So with that, we're going to turn it over to questions and comments. It looked like the chat was going off. So Brandy, I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you so much, Max, for the information. Yeah, I invite everybody, if you have some questions or want extra detail about everything Max just went over, please post them in the chat. First, I'll just direct everybody, thank you to Christopher, noting to get some of the resources that Max referenced in the chat, and we'll also send a follow-up email with links to these resources. That is the grist map that Max mentioned earlier on, and the kind of more Utah specific information. So that's the kind of the first question. And then we have a question from Christina. This is about the energy efficiency rebates, Max. She wanted to clarify that, are these the same as Rocky Mountain Power rebates, or are they different or in addition to?
Yeah, these are different, and we're working on making them in addition to and integrating them with Rocky Mountain Power and Enbridge, so that we're getting like maximizing savings as much as possible. So if you're including home energy rebates, hopefully some residential tax credits that we can save, and Rocky Mountain Power's programming, we're looking at quite a bit of savings. So again, we're working on that, but quite closely with OED and with Rocky Mountain Power.
Awesome. Thank you. I actually don't think we had many questions during the presentation. So again, we can take a minute now to open things up to post any questions in the chat. Anything else that people might want to know? Okay, here's a interesting question from Rebecca. She's wondering, the IIJA is currently under threat, and that the Trump administration is targeting impacts from the IRA, but not the other program. Do you know if that's true?
Becca, it's a good question. I have only heard about the Inflation Reduction Act most recently, and I want to say it was Columbia Law School that's been tracking this really closely. They were talking, that was the source for the investments that they're trying to claw back of unobligated funds. And all of those that I've seen have been Inflation Reduction Act funding. I haven't seen anything specifically about the bipartisan infrastructure law. So from what I know right now, it is just the IRA.
Max, I would just add,
Yeah.
That there have been some complications with funding and continued funding for electric vehicle charging and charging infrastructure, which did originate with the bipartisan infrastructure law. I think that there's a path forward for those. In terms of the legislation that is trying to claw back or curtail or eliminate funding, that's mostly through administrative moves. And so we're trying to keep clear on that, but we've had they've been encouraging work, and I think a really good willingness by the state agencies here to make sure that we're getting our fair share of those funds. That needs to continue. So that's the most important message I want to convey to everyone. Yeah.
Great. Mike has an interesting question. Based on a conversation with Mike Lee's office and bringing up the IRA rebates, they asked about what the pipeline was for pending industrial and residential grants. Do you know how to find that information, Max, or to point people towards that information?
I'm not sure what you mean by pipeline, but I would say, to check the DOE websites and the EPA websites for their grant funding awards. As far as residential grants, I don't know of any residential grants, but there is information from the IRS on some of the tax credit provisions on state by state uptake. So you can see that, for instance, the 25C, the residential energy efficiency credit in Utah in 2023, there were a little less than 21,000 households in the state that were able to use that. So if that's something that you're looking for, the IRS does still have that information up on their website. But I'm not sure what you mean by the pipeline for pending industrial grants. I would check the DOE and EPA websites and USDA as well.
Yeah. Hey, Max, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is Mike. So the question really is how much would it disrupt upcoming pending planned projects in Utah if IRA credits were to be discontinued? In other words, how many, you can do the math then, how many construction jobs, what's the economic impact of what gets canceled, uh, in relation to what's already planned if this gets continued. So that was kind of, I think, really the question they were asking me is I knew of a good source to help them understand how disruptive this would be for commercial, development activity, construction and the like in the state.
Mike, that's a good question, and one that, I will say it's because the sectors are very different, it's pretty hard to give a really good answer. Let us think on that a little bit in terms of, I mean, I would point to the fact that yesterday, there was a tour of Fluence, which is a battery storage facility in Erda, Tooele County that, we're starting to see more of those type of investments in Utah and throughout the West on the kind of large scale industrial side. There is a large and effort not too far from Rio Tinto, Kennecott, and Magna to try to make some low carbon cement that was waiting, I think, still in a $50 million grant. That's not a tax credit. The work in the the work in the residential space, both on the construction side and the participant side, is so dispersed that it's pretty hard to like give a good answer. The $2,500 tax credit for new homes, which is efficiency measures called 45L, it's not a huge measure, but spread out among a lot of new home building, and can make a really big impact in that little carrot for every home that, whether it's multifamily or single family, makes a big difference. And so we'll try to see if we can get an answer on that. That's a little bit clearer, but it's an evolving pipeline, and that's an important part of these tax credits working together, that having domestic demand in our state and our nation for solar, for batteries, for enhanced geothermal is going to make it much easier to continue to build manufacturing and building capacity. They go together, and if we're disrupting them too quickly, we're going to lose. We can build all the manufacturing facilities we want. We won't have the demand to sustain those facilities, in the long term.
Yeah, and something I'll add on to that. I think it's hard to quantify the tax credits for sure. We do have some partners. I mentioned Atlas Public Policy earlier in the talk, and they're trying to track down the effect of the pause on these funds and then also the cancellation of them. So definitely make sure to check out their website, because they do a really good job of pushing those stories out. And I had mentioned the Department of Energy's Loan Program Office earlier in the chat, in the discussion. I've heard from more than a few projects now that contract that they were in negotiation with the Department of Energy. So these companies throughout the country that are doing low embodied carbon materials. So that's, concrete and steel, that are, doing solar panel manufacturing, that are, doing energy efficient homes. All of those talks have been put on pause. And this is a program, again, that was run very successfully under Trump Volume 1, and makes the government money year over year. It is a self-sustaining revolving loan fund. And those projects are, now sort of at a loss. And so we're hearing anecdotally more and more of those sorts of stories. And we'll make sure to push them out. Brandy's been doing a great job of that for us here at Utah Clean Energy. But we'll definitely make sure to get you those resources when you're talking to the senator's offices. We want to make sure you're well equipped to
Yeah, I've been able to find a little bit, but not as much as I'd like. I do have an open invitation to get back with them if we can find more. Their interest, they don't seem terribly interested in the clean part of energy, but much more what's this going to mean in terms of economic activity or the decline, particularly, for construction type impact. So anything we can find there that we can send to that office, they seem pretty eager to review it and consider it in terms of deciding how, Senator Lee decides to vote on this.
Thank you for that information. Yeah, we'll, in the follow-up email to this webinar, we'll try to put together some helpful resources specifically to that. I do want to make sure we have time for a few other questions. This is actually similar, kind of in the same vein. Jean asks if we have any idea what percentage of IRA funds that were awarded are currently unobligated, Max.
Yeah, so of the DOE and EPA money that I have seen included in the HR1, it's a little less than 10% of what the EPA and DOE were given through the initial Inflation Reduction Act. So we have gotten a lot of this money out the door, which is really exciting. But the rest of that funding, like there would have been $5 billion more for the comprehensive climate action plan that we're working on with the Division of Air Quality to implement those measures moving forward. So, that program ends for the initial implementation funding in 2027, 2028. And there would have been the opportunity for more. So, we're missing out on quite a bit by losing that. I think it's roughly $30 billion between those two agencies.
Thank you, Max. Chris has an interesting question, and this might just go in line with things that we want to send or resources to send. But have you seen anything in your research, Max, that talks about the air quality benefits of these incentives, noting that air quality will play a role in Utah's Winter Olympic aspirations, in addition, of course, to our public health?
I will say our Division of Air Quality does some really fantastic modeling on all of their proposed work plans for the funding that they received. And Josh, I'm not sure if you know of anyone that's doing calculations on the tax credits and what effect those are having. Those are sort of harder to nail down. But through the Beehive emissions reduction plan alone, we're talking, millions and millions of tons of carbon dioxide and NOx and PM 2.5, harsh pollutants that are taken out of the air. And Chris, I'd be happy to send you the calculations that were done for that work plan and the priority climate action plan. It's actually on the Beehive emissions reduction plan website through DAQ. Highly recommend going to check it out.
Thank you, Max. So I have some really great questions about the best way to reach out to Curtis. But before we go into those, a couple very local questions. One, Ian asks, is there any hope for Utah legislators to reconsider their kind of renewed commitment to coal and their future hopes for nuclear? He's wondering if a more balanced approach or process for this, that if there could be any of that maybe in the next legislative session. I don't know if that's a question for you, Josh.
Or if Logan is on the call. Don't want to put you on the spot.
It's a good question. I think that, I'll just say that for the time being, I'd prefer to spend our time, Brandy, talking about the Inflation Reduction Act. I do think that, however, that the more we are having an opportunity to drive investment in the clean energy sectors to bring online the facilities, we have 2,000 megawatts of solar that are pending, significant number of energy storage and battery storage projects pending. We have the first 500 megawatts of enhanced geothermal systems that are subscribed, with a substantial portion of those will not go to Utah, they'll go to California entities. But after that, I think we'll have a chance to bring those online. And I think that's the key to convincing policymakers of the changes here. And that we're, investing in the energy resources that are going to make us, bring online lower cost, zero emitting homegrown resources. I don't know and I think we are going to have a live experiment about the future of coal, but I suspect that the answer will be the same as it was during the first Trump administration, was that it's going to be too costly to continue to prop up existing facilities. But we're driving investment into our energy communities right now, and that needs to be a shared focus and common ground that we have with our leaders in the state.
Thank you, Josh. All right, I'm gonna roll back for a moment to the home energy rebates program. This might be a tricky one to answer, but I think it's a fair question. Do we know any sense of timeline for implementation or the rollout of the home energy rebates program in Utah? Do we have a status?
Becca, when I get that, I will buy you dinner. We will celebrate. Right now we are working very closely with OED, and we have heard that they're trying to move forward as best they can on the project. So we want to do everything we can to support them. It's sort of a tough spot to be in at the moment, but as of right now, we do not have a project timeline from OED or the implementer of the program, Synergy, which is based in California. So we're working very hard, and we'll keep you all posted as soon as we get some substantial updates.
It is, we could add that for the folks here, that I think we've gotten positive signs that the state wants to continue to move on this program. There has been some delays from the Department of Energy and in terms of announcements. So it's I think, but in terms of a clear timeline, we're still waiting.
All right, let's end with a final, and I think one of the most important questions of this call. Thank you, Perry. He asked, what is the best way to work with Senator Curtis to support his efforts to bring back many of the IRA incentives that are going to be killed in the current proposal?
Yeah, John Curtis, he understands how important this is, and he has been championing the message of clean energy for a long time now. And we're working very closely with his office. What he needs is exactly what Mike Lee's office is asking for, which is, verified stories and numbers that are showing how important this funding is and what an impact it will have. And that conversation is a little bit easier when you're having it with an office that does believe that climate change is real, it is a threat, and that it is man-made. So, keep pushing, keep calling, let them know how important these tax credits are, how important this grant funding is, how much we need investment in the state, how much we need our grid to get more efficient, to be able to handle more load. And he knows that the only way to do that is through renewables. There's just no way that we can get liquefied natural gas and coal online in the timeline that we need to support the manufacturing we hope to have here, to support the data centers. All of that story, which, again, Brandy's doing such a good job of helping us curate here at Utah Clean Energy, that our partners, some on the call, that, Sierra Club is doing a great job, Nature Conservancy is doing a great job, Stewardship's doing a great job. Just keep pushing those stories and giving them information that we need this here. Sorry if that was rambling.
Well said, Max. Really well said. We are running out of time, so I first and foremost, I want to acknowledge and thank Max for hosting today's webinar. I don't think there's anybody in Utah that knows more about the specific details and the impacts of this funding than Max. So thank you, Max. And also thank you everybody for joining us today and for your interest and your engagement and your continued support. I'm going to put in one last note before we close. Utah Clean Energy's Director of Development couldn't make it today, but she will have my head if I don't mention that Utah Clean Energy's work, Max's work, and a lot of other clean energy and climate issues is made possible by the support of donors. And we will be launching a summer campaign and a matching challenge at the end of this week. So I'll ask that you look out for that in our follow-up email. And it's a great way to support initiatives like this in Utah. So please stay tuned for that. And with that, I'll say thank you again, and we'll see you at the next virtual Lunch and Learn. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.